We're just coming up on 2:05.
Yeah. Every quorum we have, yeah.
Yep. Can you hear me, David, on the, yeah, okay.
So there's 39 people in without members of the public. Again, if we just before anybody from members of the public come in, if there's anyone who needs to declare anything during the course of the meeting, just make sure you do it nice and early. If that's okay, just before the motion, know which motion you're coming up to. If anybody has to happen to have one, just to, so it's not a, we just have a kind of smooth. Amanda, we'll be starting with notice of motion number 2 from yourself. Okay, we'll go straight to you. Amanda. Okay. Okay. So we'll just stand for the prayer.
Have we still got one?
Well, for now. Okay, so members of the public are coming in now.
Yeah.
Members.
David, how you doing?
Yeah, I don't want them seeing. What's this to go to imagine knocking the last week?
Someone put certain councillors might take up.
Yes.
So good afternoon, members, and
afternoon, Gaiola.
So we are going to recommence the County Development Forum meeting now. So we're just going to quickly go through the key directions again for everybody who's present and for the members of the public. Please adhere to the instructions as per the key directions. So all participants must have their camera on during the meeting, and you should have your microphone on mute at all times unless called upon to speak. It is the personal responsibility of all participants to ensure that there are no persons present who are not entitled to be present for this meeting. Recording of the meeting or any part thereof is not permitted. No member of the public should attempt to speak or interrupt the meeting or interact with the members of the council during the meeting. You must adhere to any direction given to you, and the failure to follow any direction given may result in exclusion from the meeting. And this is specifically for members. If you wish to speak, you should use the hand function and you'll be given the floor. And this hand function will also be used for voting unless we use a roll call vote. Everybody happy and clear on that? If so, what we'll do is we'll hand over to Sean and then we'll proceed with the motions where we left off. Thank you.
Thanks, Gairlock. Members, just going to go through the statutory obligations as per usual with regards to the ethical framework for local government service, the code of conduct for councillors, and you being individually responsible for being compliant with same. Is it an offence if you fail to comply with some sections of the ethical framework? Regarding the disclosure of meetings, if a matter is to arise at a meeting where you or someone connected to you has a beneficial interest, you must notify the disclosure to the meeting and the nature of the beneficial interest before discussion or consideration of the matters. You must physically absent yourself from the meeting until the matter is concluded, and your disclosure and absence will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. You should then also inform the council's ethics registrar in writing after the meeting of the nature of the beneficial interest. If you are not at the meeting, but in advance of the meeting, then you must still advise the council's ethics registrar. You must put your disclosure in writing and you must furnish it to the registrar, and that disclosure will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. In terms of planning legislation and making a development plan, you're restricted to considering the proper planning and sustainable development for the area to which the plan relates, and the statutory obligations of any local authority in the area and any relevant policies or objectives for the time being for the government and minister of the government. And again, just finally, meetings should not be recorded by anyone other than the meeting administrator. Thanks, Gairlock.
Thank you, Sean. And just before we commence the meeting again, just a kind of an update on something that might be relevant as regards to our time that we've been here, just so you know yourselves. So we have spent 32 hours prior to Christmas. We have spent 26 hours in January, and by the end of this week, should we make it to the end of Saturday, we will have spent 15 hours this week on the county development plan by the conclusion of our proceedings this week. So it's just something to bear in mind with regards to the timetable that people were interested in our last meeting, just to kind of get an update on where we are and where we hope to be by the end of the week. So with that said, we will move on to notice of motion number 2 from the floor. Councillor Amanda Smith, if we have a seconder for that motion, please. You have a seconder, please?
I'll second it.
Ooh, sorry. Councillor Tormey, thank you. So Councillor Smith.
Cathaoirleach, just before we go on to this motion, I submitted a motion on Friday evening. Well, it was an amendment, but I've been told that it can't be put forward because it was voted on. Now, being honest, I didn't realise that I could put an amendment at the floor after the motion. Lack of experience, to be honest. I thought that the motions from the floor had to be the night before. And I understand this is an amendment. I didn't realise that I could have put an amendment on it. You know, the lack of experience on my behalf, you know, the motion, is there any chance I can put the motion forward now?
Councillor, just with regards to our standing orders and correct, I can be corrected, of course, but once we have decided that we voted on a piece of land, it's not possible for us to revisit that as per our standing orders, and that we had by consensus agreed to do that over the course of the meeting up to date. So in the 58 hours that we've spent so far discussing that, it hasn't been something that we've done, and I think that it's going to create a series of problems and something that we can't do. We did vote on that piece of land, Councillor.
I thought before we did do it, sorry, Curlick, before it was done in the chamber where someone got an amendment after something was voted.
Not when it's voted on. Not when it's voted on.
So there's no way, even though this is an amendment and it's not being.
But we have voted on the piece of land. We've made a decision. We've adjudicated on that piece of land.
But I asked the members what they think.
I will ask them. No, Councillor, hold on a second, Councillor. Now, this is not in the remit of participants to ask for a vote on something. I'll ask for the vote.
Oh, sorry.
So what we're doing is, if anyone is not in agreement that we would revisit a piece of land that we have already voted on, and again, what we'll do before we do anything else, we'll get some input as well, maybe from maybe Rory on this, and we might get some advice from the planning department as well, because if we start going back over parcels of land that we've already voted on, I'm sure there's implications all over the place on that. So Rory?
Good afternoon. Yeah, there's a difficulty because just think of the precedent of this. If you reopen something that you have previously dealt with, that opens the door for going back over the entire draft plan. You're going through a statutory process. You're dealing with segments of your draft development plan incrementally. And I believe that having dealt with it, it's finished for this part of the process, and will only come back before the members again if there's some material alteration that has to be put on public display. But I don't think matters which have been dealt with should be revisited. That's purely on the basis of you're going through a statutory process. You have dealt with a particular property. There are other issues with regard to standing orders. From recollection, I think there's something in standing orders that a motion cannot be amended or replaced with an amended motion for 6 months or something after it has been considered. But leaving all standing orders aside, I have serious concerns about reopening a matter which has already been voted on. Thank you.
Councillor Killian.
Thanks, Ciara. As I said, I'm not aware of what the amendment is or anything about it. Can Pádraig please outline when, and this is something that I still have difficulty with, the situation in relation to what goes back out on public display. My understanding is that you can only deal with what's put on public display. At that stage, can an amendment be made to what's gone before? And I'm not talking about this particular issue. I'm talking about all proposals that have been accepted and adopted, or otherwise.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Meath.
Thank you, Ciara. And I suppose there's pros and cons to every argument whether we go back or not. But I suppose if we are open and going back, I'd be of the opinion, and I think some of my other councillors would be very much of the opinion, we should go back to Drogheda and reopen Drogheda because of some things we didn't do, in our opinion, the right way there. And rural policy, I think we need to go back and fix the nodes. And I think we should open them debates as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tolan.
Thank you, Catherlough. From my own perspective, and I'm only giving my own perspective here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I understood that no more motions could be brought, obviously from 5 p.m. last Friday, but once an area was closed, that area and that settlement was dealt with. If this motion is in relation to a settlement that is not finished and not closed, and the motion was submitted before 5 p.m. on Friday, I think it's only fair to hear it. We don't know. I have no idea what that motion is in relation to, but if it's in relation to an item that we've voted on for a particular zoning and we voted against it, fair enough. If it's a different zoning now on the same piece of land within a settlement that hasn't been closed off, my understanding would have been that we would have heard the discussion.
So just for clarity, is my understanding that this notice of motion relates to a piece of land that we have already voted on. It's not an additional piece of land. It relates to a parcel of land that was under discussion, and then we voted and we made a decision on it. So the Chamber has made a decision on this particular piece of land, and the notice of motion is to amend the decision that we have already made, which to date we have not allowed. And if we do that, as Councillor Meath has indicated, he will wish to go back and revisit decisions that we made in Drogheda. And I feel in the interest of this meeting, it is not something that I can allow. Councillor Behan.
Thank you, Catherlough. Yeah, I'd support Councillor Smith just in the interest and what she has stated, that she didn't realise that there was amendments could have been made on the day or from the floor, and that she wasn't in a position that she didn't know she could have done it. If it's something that we can't do once we hear the motion, I suppose we can go through that, but I'd be in favour of hearing the motion. Thank you.
I believe, just again from my own recollection, that particular discussion, it was highlighted that there was a possibility to make an amendment, but not to make an amendment without the inclusion of maps. It would have been necessary to have a whole process. The suggestion was that we'd review maps, that then we start to identify parcels of land that we could vote out in order to accept this piece of ground. That's my recollection of the meeting, and we had made the decision on that piece of land. So if we make a decision now that we can revisit a piece of land, please be aware of what we're doing if we do that, and we pay attention to what Rory McEntee has said. If we have decide to revisit decisions that we have already taken, then this decision that we have already taken can be revisited right back to any decision that we have taken over the course of this county development plan. So people need to understand and be responsible with regards to what it is that they're doing here. Because again, if people, in the interest of fairness, that people say in the interest of fairness, we could facilitate a councillor, then in the interest of fairness, we should facilitate every councillor who can put up a legitimate reason why they feel that their piece of land or a particular motion should be readdressed. So I feel that we need to act in a very responsible way here. Councillor Tobin and then Councillor Killian.
Thanks, Catherlough. I would see this as a separate motion on the same piece of land, and as far as I'm aware of the detail of the motion, it isn't anything to do with the current development plan, but would see potentially something coming into play at the end of the lifetime of the county development plan. So therefore, it has no bearing on the motion that was defeated on the previous day, whatever day it was, and it won't affect any other land around it or the county development plan, what has gone on previously or anything like that. So I wouldn't see this as a conflict within the development plan itself. I would see it as a separate motion being brought to the floor with totally different circumstances that is, as I say, is still within the settlement and therefore should be allowed. I would be of the same opinion as my friend and colleague, Councillor Tolan, and I would also just be supportive of Amanda as well, or Councillor Smith as well, because in my opinion, she was forced, well, not forced, but she took the vote, possibly thinking that she had done everything that she needed to do for that.
Sorry, Councillor, you can't interpret what Councillor Smith may or may not have thought. We do not know what Councillor.
I spoke to her over the last.
Well, it's for herself. It's for herself to express that, not for you. Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, but I spoke to her, so I'm
okay.
back.
So you suggested that.
My point is to ask Rory McEntee, because it's to do with pushing this out to 2027. It's not actually going to affect this current development plan. So therefore, is it legitimate to take it today?
Okay, so again, what we did was, just let's remember what we did when we were voting on anything as well. Let's remember what it is we do when we vote on something. We vote to accept or to agree with the Chief Executive's recommendation, or not to agree with the Chief Executive's recommendation based upon the motion upon which we voted on. We agreed with the Chief Executive's recommendation in this regard, that no change was recommended. That's what we did. We agreed on that at the time. So we weren't voting for or against Councillor Smith's motion at the time. We were voting for or against the Chief Executive's recommendation. And if the Chief Executive's recommendation had fallen, we would have subsequently agreed with Councillor Smith's motion. But what we did was we agreed that no change was recommended. Now, the impact of that no change, should we decide to do something that's applying a change subsequent to this county development plan, we had said no change recommended for the duration of this county development plan. And we agreed that. So if we have to revisit every agreement that we've made over the last 2,000 odd recommendations, then that's something that you as members and us as members are opening up to this floor, bearing in mind what Rory has said. Okay? Now, if this is something that is pushing a piece of land out beyond this county development plan and not going to affect this county development plan, so you want to open up a precedent for this discussions on this county development plan that, from what Councillor Tobin has said, has no bearing on this county development plan. Just be conscious of the consequences of our decisions. It is within our remit to make any decision we want, but if we open this up, we open up everything that we possibly can discuss. And this is not about one individual councillor, and absolutely I would be sympathetic to Councillor Smith, but it's what we do as members here. So if this motion has got to do with pushing land beyond, and I haven't seen the motion, so Councillor Tobin has spoken on a motion that hasn't been presented to the floor. So that's the position. So we take Councillor Sarah Riley.
Thank you, Chair, and I've listened to the debate with interest. I have to say I stand behind you 100% on this one, Cathaoirleach. I'm not familiar with the motion or the sentiments of it. It's purely to do with the legal basis behind what we are proposing to do. As you outlined from the outset, we've already spent approximately 60 hours debating our county development plan. If we are to open and revisit previous motions, it would put everything that we have already decided into jeopardy. And we are really setting a very dangerous precedent if we go down this road. And I don't see the rationale for it, particularly given what Councillor Tobin has already highlighted. I think, look, it's an unfortunate circumstances, in particular, given that Councillor Smith is a new councillor and perhaps didn't realise, and that's unfortunate. But I would guess, and I would argue, that she would have an opportunity to look at it again under the local area plan for her area. I cannot stand behind this argument. As again, I said, the precedent we are setting is far too dangerous. And given the hard work and dedicated hours that we have all put in to date, to put that into jeopardy at this stage just really doesn't make any sense to me. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Councillor Bonner.
Hello. Yeah. Just only on, like, I think should continue on also, because well, just to put on notice, like, if it goes back, I'd also be looking for, like, last Thursday and last Friday I couldn't attend, due to situation beyond my control, and my motions didn't get presented, and I had to accept that. It wasn't nice, but I had to accept it. So that's all I would say.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Killian. Sorry, Councillor, just turn on your microphone there, please.
Sorry, Ciarán. No, I did. I asked for clarity there earlier from Pádraig in relation to the next step within the development plan process. And if I could get that, I'd be appreciative.
We'll come back to that, yeah, absolutely, before we move on. Absolutely. Councillor Dempsey. Thank you.
Thank you, Ciarán. I think Councillor Sarah Riley has really summed up what I was going to say. You know, I too am a new councillor and have been involved in decisions here that I mightn't have fully understood. Well, I understood the decisions, but the ramifications on other motions that were coming before us. But I think, unfortunately, that's democracy. You know, like Councillor Meath there, I would want to revisit the nodes if I could at all. So I just think we've put the work in now, we've put the hours in, and unfortunately, as I said, it is democracy in action. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tobin.
My comments are more in a general vein, in the sense that certainly I don't want to prolong this process any longer than it's already gone on. 60 hours of meetings is really only the tip of the iceberg. There's been a huge number of hours in terms of all of us having to read through the documentation, meet constituents, formulate submissions, motions, etc. So it is a massive, massive amount of work. But I do recognise some merit in what Councillor Smith was saying in terms of the process for new councillors. And I've spoken to experienced councillors about this whole process, and they have found it, some of them have found it difficult. There's a very steep learning curve. There's an awful lot to take in doing your work as well as you can for your constituents. And you can't possibly know everything the first time round. And there isn't a guidebook that we can all read to prepare us for doing as good a job as we can for our constituents. And I myself messed up on something because I hadn't relied that my motion had been grouped in with a huge bunch of motions, and you know, something missed out. So it's not that I want to cry over spilled milk or anything, but I do really want us to acknowledge that, you know, there's so much to learn in doing this properly, and it is very, very easy to miss something or not realize that if you didn't get an amendment in time, that it scuppers your chance to put in a good motion on behalf of your constituent. And you know, this needs to be kind of, I would imagine for the next time we do a county development plan, there should be better guidelines and preparations for councillors so that they know every possibility of how to do their job as good as possible, so that we have a really excellent plan going forward in the next term.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say I'm sure we will have a really excellent plan going forward at this particular moment of time. I think that it would be it wouldn't be correct to suggest that we won't, Councillor. Also, what you would all bring to your attention, this, for the vast majority of people in this chamber, this is our first county development plan. This is my first county development plan. This is, with the exception of some of the, may say, more senior members of the chamber. This is the first county development plan by far and away the vast majority of us. So they are, like, I understand with regards to a comment that may relate to a lack of experience, and that's absolutely something that should be recognized. But this is the first time for us all, for me as well. You know, so this is something that you know, we can't legislate for every possible eventuality. We must deal with it fairly, and what we've tried to do at all times is deal with it fairly, consistently, and to try and ensure that people understand the ramifications of a decision should we take it. We've gone through everything as we said we would, slowly, methodically, ensuring everybody understood as best as possible. We're asked if people understand at the time, were they happy to go to a vote, were they happy that their motions were under, you know, this process has been taken very, very steadily, indeed much more slowly than we would have been if we had been in the public domain, if we, not public domain, but meeting together, not online. There's been extra effort made to make sure, because of the extra difficulties that are included in this and the extra newness. So there's nobody doing the county development plan like this. Nobody in the whole country has done a county development plan like this. And nobody in this, or very few people in this area, have done a county development plan at all in this room. So while I do take on board Councillor Smith's concerns and the concerns expressed by the other members of the chamber, we have to do things in a consistent fashion and understand the consequences of what it is we're doing. You know, and expressing concern on behalf of another councillor is something, but the councillors, there is an onus at the end of the day that we have to understand what it is we're doing. Councillor O'Connor, then we'll go back to Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Ciara. I understand the position that Councillor Smith finds herself in, and 9 times out of 10 would like to support her, but I think you've outlined it very, very eloquently, Ciara. It's consistency we're looking for this plan. We have put over 60 hours into it. And if we make an exception now, we might as well start again and go back to all the rural chapters, open up the rural strategy, open up all that we've already done Trojan work on. I don't think we can afford to do that for something that's outside the 7 years of this plan. The planning is post 2027, which doesn't relate to this plan. We've done an awful lot of tremendous work on this plan, and I would urge my colleagues to take that decision. You know, we need to get this plan through the process. We've done an awful lot of good work. We've had some wins and some losses, and as Councillor Bonner said, he was fortunate, but sometimes that's the way it is. And you know, I take exception with a comment there from in relation to training. And let me just outline, I'm senior people by age, as you referred to, Ciara.
I said senior, Councillor, senior. I didn't say now particularly anything about age.
No, but we did go through a county development plan before, but there was nothing happening. We were in the middle of a recession. There was no submissions. There was 2,500 submissions to this plan. It's a different beast altogether. And we're all learning on the spot. And we attended the workshops and we read our program, and we had to prepare the best we could. And I understand. I look at my 12 colleagues in Fine Gael. There's only 4 of them would have been there in that previous county development plan. And this is all new. So, Ciara, I think that the knock-on effect, I mean, let's listen to what Rory McEntee said. The knock-on effect of this is basically putting us back down to stage 1 again. And I couldn't support that. And I'm asking my colleagues to really consider that, because this is too serious. We've waited for this plan for too long. We've got to get it through and get on with driving our county, get on with achieving the targets that are set out in this, get on and allow us to get our developments going and putting in the infrastructure. This is too important. Ciara, thank you.
And Councillor Tormey.
Thanks, Ciara. Yeah, Ciara, we are still discussing Bettystown, Laytown, Mornington and Donacarney, my understanding. So I think Councillor Tolan might have made this point already. The fact, when I finish the settlement, like going back to Drogheda, we've already finished that settlement. Ashburn, we've already finished that settlement. I can understand you're not going back to them, but we're still in this one now. I'm not sure what the motion is yet, but I would be of the opinion that we should be allowing Councillor Smith in to this motion. Just
for clarification, it's my understanding that the piece of this motion is relating to a piece of land that we have already made a decision on, and that is what the precedent. That's what we're talking about here. It's not a new piece of land that is in the area. We have already made the decision on this piece of land. It's a piece of land, from my recollection, that you weren't present in the room for.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen the motion, Chair.
Yeah, so but that is my understanding. That's why, and it's my understanding that's why the motion was ruled out of order. That it's that the motion was ruled out of order because we've already decided, we've already made a decision on this piece of land. And the precedent that we're setting is that we accept a decision to revisit a decision that we've made. That's the thing. It's not the piece of land, it's that we revisit a decision we've made. So if we accept to revisit a decision that we've made after discussing it at length and having voted on it, then the precedent that is set is that we can open up a decision, a revisit to any decision that we've made.
I think if we get an answer
once we agree the principle,
Killian's question there might help us.
Once we agree the principle, it's only a matter of quantity after that.
Yeah, if we get an answer to Councillor Killian's question, it could help us.
Okay, so Pádraig, if you want to come in there, Councillor Killian's question.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and hello, members. The question directly refers to what happens next, really, and regarding the material alterations. So under section 12.7a of the Planning and Development Act is where effectively following the adoption of following the completion, I should say, of this process under 12.6 of the Act, it will be the function of the executive to determine what are the overall amendments to the entire plan. Those amendments are divided into non-material amendments and material amendments. Material amendments are effectively those which are considered significant amendments and that should go out to public consultation. So I would expect that the vast majority, and particularly zoning objectives and zoning changes, for example, those will all go out to a further 4-week public consultation. So it's only where changes have occurred from the development plan, and that the public and statutory bodies and agencies and departments and everybody get the opportunity to comment. In terms of timeline, we were following the completion of this process, together with the Chief Executive, we decide what period we need to, what amendments need to be strategically environmentally assessed under the SEA directive. We obviously have to get our consultants to look at that. So there's a period, a lag effectively from when we complete this process to putting the material alterations out to public consultation. And that public consultation will consist of 4 weeks. And then 4 weeks later, we have to do the final Chief Executive's report and get it sent back to you as members. And then after that, we will meet the members within a specific period. I'm just looking through the Act here as I speak, but there is a time period within which we must conclude the meetings to discuss that final Chief Executive report with the members. But I will emphasise, and I guess it's at the heart of the question from Councillor Killian, is that it is only and exclusively the amendments to the draft plan and those that are out on public consultation that you will be discussing at the next stage of the process. Everything else is agreed effectively in the plan. So it's only the material alterations which you will be commenting on at the next stage of the process. And I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Can I just bring Sean in there as well?
Thanks, Cahirlook. I just wanted to address the comments, I suppose, with regards to members feeling as if they were ill-prepared for the process that we're going through at the minute, and just to address a couple of those comments in terms of that. The OPR's office has given extensive training in terms of county development plan and the process that the county development plan goes through. And I know certainly from our perspective in terms of the planning forward team, the Chief Executive and the Director of Planning, we have spent considerable amount of times, both face to face when time's allowed for it, and over the phone with members, talking them through the process, advising them what needs to be done and how they go about certain things. So we've provided extensive backup to members in terms of that. We've also had 4 workshops, members. One of them being the very first one when members had just been appointed. We had one in the Arboyne Hotel, and we've had 3 more since throughout the process. Again, advising members in terms of where we're at and how we'd be moving forward. So just wanted to, I suppose, highlight those issues. And every evening, I suppose, prior to a meeting, an email is sent to members with the documents that will be discussed at the next day, and advising members how the day would be set out as best we can. In relation to the matter that we're discussing at the minute, it's a standing order item, and that's a matter that members must be aware of. The standing order, it's not to do with the county development plan process, it's a standing order item, standing order 11.4. Also, in terms of the matter we're dealing with at the minute, all members received an email advising them that any of the submissions or notice of motion from the floor relating to Laytown, Bettystown must be submitted by lunchtime on Thursday. And that's the ones that we're discussing now at the minute. An additional one come in on Friday. However, lunchtime Thursday was the close-off point for submissions in relation to Laytown, Bettystown. And Friday evening was the close-off for submissions in relation to all other settlements. Thanks, Cahirlook.
Thank you very much. So just again, so essentially, right, just to boil down the question that's been put to the floor, we're discussing. We are saying, should we suspend standing orders? Should we suspend standing order 14.1, actually, which pertains specifically to a resolution may not be rescinded at a meeting at which it has been adopted, right? So we have that within our standing orders 14.1. So in a moment, if we decide to move to a vote on this, that's what we will be asked to do. Do we suspend standing orders in order to facilitate the admission of a single motion? Okay, that's what we're doing here. And if members feel that it's important enough to admit a motion, that we should by doing so, we rescind or we suspend our standing orders, which it must apply then across the whole meeting. So any decision that we make can be revisited at any time. That's what we're agreeing to do. Okay, and let's be quite clear, that's what we're doing here. And as a Councillor Tobin said, it's relating to the parcel of land to apply a subsequent zoning that doesn't even exist within, doesn't even apply within the current county development plan process. If that's what I'm led to believe from Councillor Tobin's submission there, or observation, comment. So this is as I outlined earlier on, and I again, further detail, you are being asked to suspend our standing orders to facilitate this amendment, this motion. Okay, Councillor Tobin.
I think Sean has just clarified the whole situation in one go there that I wasn't aware of. He said that lunchtime on Thursday was the final time that a motion could come in off the floor. And if that came in on Friday and it wasn't allowed, then it wasn't allowed. If that's the fact of the matter, then forget about what I said, because it's not allowed to bring it in anyway, because it didn't come in on time.
Agreed.
Okay. So what do we need to do? So I'm going to ask specifically, we had a considerable discussion on this now. We've had 35 minutes discussion on this. Maybe it's an opportunity that we can take a moment to consider this, because it's the first time it's happened during the county development plan. And every time we've had a new thing within the county development plan, we've taken time to discuss it so that we don't have to discuss it again. So I'm going to ask the group, ask the room chamber, do we need to move this to a vote, or are we happy to accept to apply our standing orders? Also cognizant of what Sean said. Councillor Killian.
Look, we've gone from a situation with this county development plan where we were being asked to hand in motions on the day of the actual debate. That's when we were in the solstice. Then there was deadlines started, and so we actually have changed the rules as we've gone along. But we haven't been consistent in our own decision making. And like, to be fair to Jackie, she did quite clearly outline on Friday evening the situation in relation to motions for the rest of the week. And yes, we all have accepted that. We could argue, but we have accepted it. But I think in this case for Amanda, and again, I'm not aware of what the motion is. I heard what you said to Councillor Tormey, but the situation from Amanda's perspective was she didn't really, she didn't understand. No, the argument can be made, well, she should have, but she didn't. And I think a genuine effort has been made by her to rectify her situation. So, you know, I think that in this particular instance, she should be allowed put forward her motion. And bearing in mind standing orders have been upheld all days down as long as I'm on Meath County Council. And while people might think that 60 hours is a long time, we spent 2 and 3, 4 weeks in the council chamber till 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, going back years dealing with development plans. So, like, don't get caught up on the amount of time we spent on Zoom. You know, I've sat in the chamber till 2 o'clock, and Conor Tormey and Tommy Riley would have been with me, and Brian Fitzgerald. You know, so like long days and long nights have gone into them before. So, in fact, 60 hours is not an awful lot in the term. Long because of COVID, because we're doing it on this particular mechanism of Zoom. But overall, it's not, going back other years.
Thank you. Thank you. I suppose it's important, if we're looking at the timeline of how we've changed, and we've changed closing times or deadlines, we have done it through agreement at all times. And at that moment when we were discussing it, everybody was quite clear, and everyone is always asked, anyone not clear, everyone sure you know what we're talking about, everyone clear on what we're voting about, everyone in agreement, anyone not in agreement. We have taken this step by step with regards to the length of time spent on previous county development plans. All we can judge here is the quality of the time that we have spent here. We have been very intense in our talk. We're not calling into question any other spending of times and how other county development plans were done, but this format, offers a very focused and very energy and attention high format of county development planning, you know, and we have adhered and we have taken, as a group, we have at all times tried to ensure that everyone knows what's going on. And if people aren't sure, they've been asked, are you not sure? Always, consistently. And that's the time to bring it up. Now, if we're going to allow this motion, this is not just bending the rules a little bit. This is setting a significant precedent to suspend our standing orders or to contravene our standing orders. That's what we're doing here. Okay, and it might just be a bit of a motion, but when we're talking about these things, it's very specific. And this specific topic is named within our standing orders under 14.1. You know, about rescinding a decision that we've made during the course of a meeting. That's what we're doing here. We have made a decision and we're being asked to rescind that decision. So this is extremely consequential. Councillor Meath.
Thank you, Cahir. And just to follow up, I, like most people, have a level of sympathy here on this, but I should be very clear. The rural policy and the rural nodes massively impacted me and massively impacted the area I lived in, especially Laytown and Mornington, where the node now is on a football pitch. And I want to be straight up in telling you this, Cahir, that if this motion does pass, I will have a motion into the council by the end of the day looking for us to reopen the rural policy, because I do think that the opening is there then for it. I do honestly believe it should be done. I do think the nodes in Laytown and Mornington and not common and such should be really looked at. And I do honestly believe that. I believe that's a massive thing in the county development plan that I would like to go back and revisit. And I'd be 100% about that. And I will be pushing that very strongly if allowed.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Murphy.
Hi, thanks, Cahir. Look, I have sympathy with Councillor Smith. She is a new councillor and she has done this process before, and we've all been in that situation. But what frightens me here is the legal precedent. We're dealing with a county development plan, which is part of a, bound by legislation. Our standing orders are critical to this. I'm listening to Rory's very good advice as always, and I'm very fearful of what the consequence could be if we supported Councillor Smith now. It's not about what she's trying to do, it's the basis, and it's the fact that we're actually considering it for any reason whatsoever. There's a number of us haven't got what we wanted in this plan on different issues, and we've had to consider waiting for the local area plan, which will be another year. But things will have changed. It'll be a different forum, and we'll hopefully we'll all get our projects, our topics, moved further along that. That's my position on it. The one thing I'd ask to Rory of is that when we vote on any issue, there's a number of councillors that are present that vote on any issue. And what would be the consequence if we vote on this issue again, and there are councillors that were present the first time and not here present today? Any decision we take, for the remainder of the process, I could vote on something in an hour, and if it's in the same settlement tomorrow, that situation might come back up on the forum again. And I think that's a very unfair situation kind of to have us in, and I'm not sure what the consequence of that would be from Rory's perspective. I'd like to hear that's my contribution. Thank you, Cahir.
Thank you, Councillor. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get Rory back in, and then we're going to go to a vote, and so give you time to consider what it is we're going to be voting on. While Rory has given us his reflection, is that we're going to be voting, should we suspend standing orders, 14.1 particularly. So that's what we're going to, will we be suspending standing orders 14.1? So Rory, and then we go to a roll call vote.
Yeah, and Cahir, Councillor Murphy raises an interesting question, but I think the answer is that the elected members of the council act as a group, as a single entity, the elected members, and I don't think decisions are affected by the fact that a particular member may be present one day and not another day. So I don't think that would be an issue, but I have to stress and reiterate the appalling vista, as it were, that would be open to the can of worms if this motion is allowed in because of the precedent. And a number of councillors have fairly pointed out that there weren't always happy with what was decided, but just have to put up with it. And if you open a crack in the door, somebody said we might as well start the whole thing again. And I think we're leaving ourselves open to all sorts of legal challenges here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rory. Councillor Smith.
Hi, thanks, Cahill, and thanks everyone for your contribution. There was an exception made on this in the chamber. The exact same thing happened, as far as I'm aware. Councillor Murphy had a motion in that was brought down, and an amendment was made from the floor. This was in the chamber, and it was resubmitted as an amendment.
But sorry, Councillor, that wasn't submitted before a decision was made. Or sorry, it was dismissed. It was submitted before the decision was made. We hadn't made a decision. The motion was submitted, and then we made a decision. It wasn't that we had voted on it.
I was under the
absolutely so,
and that's fair enough. Look,
yeah.
I'm asking that I can put this forward. I was asked to put this forward on behalf of Geraldine Keoghan, whose mum had passed away. I had a couple of days to brief myself, know and prepare myself to deliver the motion. I asked for maps while I was speaking about the motion 3 or 4 times. I felt I was rushed. I had no idea, absolutely no idea in my head that I had to make the amendment there and then. I didn't know I could do that. Okay, following that, I submitted my motion on time Friday evening, asking, it's a completely different motion than this one, so I would call it an amendment, but it's actually a different motion.
Okay, so again, just to, and obviously very simple.
And I feel I have a right to be able to put forward a motion.
Okay, so
thank you.
We're very sympathetic towards the position. Obviously, everyone's found themselves in. It is a very difficult time. It's a very difficult situation. But again, the crux of what we're talking about now is the fact that you're asking us to revisit a piece of land, or revisit a decision that we have already made. So we made a decision when we were discussing this parcel of land that we would adhere to the Chief Executive's recommendation of no change. Now what you're asking is that we revisit that decision. And that is what we are talking about now. Your motion is raising the question. We are now addressing the question, not the motion. So can we revisit a decision that we have already made during the course of this meeting or any meeting? And under our standing orders 14.1, it says that even in a regular run-of-the-mill council decision, we can't revisit that decision we've made, our meeting. We can't revisit that decision for 6 months. That's what it says in standing orders 14.1. So what it is that what you're asking us to do is to return to a decision we've made within the last week about specifically to a decision that we've made. So just to make sure now again that we understand that the point that you're raising, not necessarily the content of the motion, it's the point of the motion, and it is that you're asking us to revisit a decision that we have made already. Okay? Now, and the other element that was raised in your point that you felt rushed, personally, there was a discussion around it. We spoke at length. We said that the issue was that, particularly around the maps, it was that a decision can't take place during the course of the meeting about identifying other pieces of land. That wasn't in the motion. The piece of land that we were discussing was the amendment would require another map to explain the parcel of land that you are looking to swap in, to take out in order to put in. That could not take place. That had not taken place over the course of a meeting. And I asked you, were we okay to vote and okay to move to a vote? And you had agreed at the time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move to a vote. And the vote will be about the suspension of the standing orders. It'll be a roll call vote. And the question is, are you in agreement with the suspension of standing orders? Or should we suspend standing orders? So if you believe that we should suspend standing orders, 14.1, say yes. If you believe that we should not suspend standing orders, say no. Everybody clear on what they're being asked? Anybody not clear on what they're being asked? So I would ask you also to consider everything that took place, a comprehensive discussion taking place. We've nearly talked about it for an hour now. We've had a number of pieces of advice, and I would ask you to particularly pay reference to the advice that was given by Rory. Thank you. Robert.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I hope you can hear me today. Good afternoon, members. Councillor Adanuga. Don't think Councillor Adanuga is present. Councillor Behan.
No.
Councillor Bonner.
Not suspending standing orders.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bray.
No.
Councillor Cassidy.
No.
Councillor Dean. Councillor Dean, you're on mute.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Dempsey.
No.
Councillor Drew. Councillor Drew, are you still with us? I'm recording Councillor Drew as absent. Councillor Fennessy is not present. Councillor Fitzgerald is not present. Councillor Fitzsimons.
No.
Councillor Fox. Councillor Fox.
Sorry, I was on mute there. No, sorry, no.
Thank you. Councillor French.
No.
Councillor Gallagher is not present. Councillor Garrity Smith is not present. Councillor Gilroy.
No.
Councillor Golden. Is Councillor Golden with us? Councillor Drew, I see you're there now. Can I return to you and can you indicate yes or no? I'll come back to you, Councillor. Councillor Golden is not present. Councillor Harding. You're on mute, Councillor.
No. 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 Not to suspend, no.
Okay, and I got yours, Councillor Drew. Thank you. Councillor Jamal.
No.
Councillor Keoghan.
Yes.
Councillor Killian.
Sorry, Councillor.
Councillor Killian.
Yes.
Councillor Laws is not present. Councillor McCabe.
No.
Councillor McGinty.
No.
Councillor McKee.
No.
Councillor Meath.
No.
Councillor Moore is not present. Councillor Murphy.
No.
Councillor O'Connor.
No.
Councillor Aisling O'Neill is not present. Councillor O'Reilly.
No.
Councillor Sarah Riley.
No.
Councillor Tommy Riley. I'm taking it as no, Councillor. Yep. Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Smith.
Yes.
Councillor Sewin.
No.
Councillor Tobin.
No.
Councillor Tobin.
Yes.
Councillor Tolan.
No.
Councillor Toole.
No.
Councillor Tormey.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. So the result of that vote is 25 not in favour of suspending standing orders, 6 in favour of suspending standing orders, and 9 not present. So we will not be suspending standing orders, and so we'll move on now with notice of motion 2. Councillor Smith. We have a seconder for that? That was already seconded, wasn't it? Yeah. Councillor Tormey seconded that. Councillor Smith.
I hope this is better. The development on the coastline has grown considerably over the last number of decades. It's very important that we avoid development in areas of flood risk and new developments that may increase flooding. This area has seen extreme flooding, and even with best energy or engineering solutions, Mother Nature will always find a way. We don't want to see what happened in the Northfields and the houses along the coastline that are victims of coastal erosion. If we're serious about tackling climate change and adapting our development plan, we must put in a buffer zone on all coastal areas. I understand that there's a map there, and I understand that there is A2, A1 or whatever close to the flood zones, and I think Councillor Tolan had mentioned on Friday that these were already built on, which I think is all the more reason to create a buffer zone around an area so that we will protect future developments ever being built, and that they wouldn't be built within a buffer zone around the flood zone. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Councillor. We go to the Chief Executive for a response first.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I suppose two key issues I'll highlight here regarding the notice of motion. It is almost exactly the same as a previous notice of motion that was brought forward by Councillor Paddy Mead, and I refer to NOM 139, which was briefly discussed and subsequently withdrawn by Councillor Paddy Mead. So we have discussed this issue before in terms of flooding, and Councillor Smith was asking for maps. We obviously have the maps which represent the flooding that emerged from the CFRAMs and also from our analysis of all settlements whilst doing the development plan. As of the last day and today and any subsequent day, I can confirm the members that every single settlement, every single piece of land is analysed, is looked at and assessed for potential flood risk. And that is part of the process. The development plan guidelines require it. The flood risk, there is a flood risk directive, and we are obliged to ensure that any lands that we now bring forward for development are not prone to flooding. So that was an assurance we gave the last day. It is the same today. I am supported today by our flood engineer online, David Keys. If any further clarification is required following my input here, we can bring David online. But if we go to the notice of motion and the wording, and I'll ask Sean or Alan to bring it up there, I would ask for clarification exactly what we're being asked to do here. And what that says is to avoid decisions that will make it more difficult to manage climate risk and flood risk in the future. I seek to amend them maps, what maps I don't know, of all the East Meath coastal area to allow for the removal of A1 and A2 zoning on lands where a flood risk is currently known. I would seek a buffer zone around the flood risk areas. So there is, if you read into each word, phrase, section, there are huge implications of a result of this motion, and we don't have a perfect understanding of everything that it entails. The only assurance that we can give at this time is that every single settlement has been analysed for flood risk, and it's based on a scientific analysis and detailed consideration by external consultants. GBA consultants were involved in this, that based much of the work on the CFRAM's work, which is a national programme of flood risk assessment. So I will have to seek further clarification from councillors. If we are, I suppose the first point I will make, if we are to proceed with this motion, we have to understand what the implications are. We currently don't, because what it's asking for is removal of A1, A2 zone lands. What are they? Where are they? What are the risks? What's the level of flooding? What's the spatial extent of it? What is the depth of flooding? And then seek a buffer zone around flood risk areas. How much is that? Is it 10 meters? Is it 50? And what's the justification for it? Where is the scientific justification for such a motion or for such an action? We do not consider it necessary. And as I say, I personally am not a flood risk engineer, but I have flood risk expertise online if it is required. So I will pass back to you, Chair, for further discussion.
Thank you, Patrick. Councillor Meath.
Thank you, Cahir, and thank you, Councillor Smith, for your motion. As people might remember last week, I had 3 motions down in relation to flooding, and I had one quite similar, I think, to this one, which was to on zone land in flooding areas. And then I was looking more into the future. Sadly, when my first motion fell, I knew there was no hope for the next. But if we look at different reports carried out by the Irish Planning Institute and such about global warming, and if you look at the potential of Irish sea levels being 5 metres even higher than where they are now, and if you consider then at high tide in Bettystown and Laytown, if you add in them 2 things and look into the future, I would say you have to on-zone nearly everything out there until such time as flood defences are put in. And why A2 as well as A1? Well, the reason to on-zone existing residential land where there is already houses is because while there is houses there, someone in the future might buy them to develop a complex or something, and you wouldn't want that happening in a potential flood zone. If we as councillors are to take global warming seriously, if we are to take it that the sea levels are rising, and if we are to look not just 6 years into the future as this development plan does, but if we are to look at 100 years into the future, we must be very concerned about global warming and the effects it will have on Laytown, Bettystown and Mornington. In 2006, family members of mine and a lot of their neighbours around Mornington got their houses flooded. It is very serious. And that will only get worse as we go into the future. So for all of them reasons, I'm very, very happy that this is being discussed for another day here. Sadly, there wasn't enough support behind my motions the other day. But if there is here today, I'm happy to support them because it's a serious issue. And I was disappointed last week that some people opposed me on them because this is serious. We could be looking when a lot of us are very late in life at areas out there being flooded, unless flood defences are put in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And just before we go any further, and before we bring in Councillor Behan or Councillor Tolan, just for clarification, the motions didn't fall, Councillor, you withdrew them. So
yes, sorry, to clarify, I withdrew them.
You withdrew them, yeah.
After checking there was no support.
Yeah, well, it wasn't put to the vote, so you withdrew them prior to that. Councillor Behan.
Thank you, Cahirlock. This motion seems to be coming up quite a lot. Obviously, we've dealt with it with Councillor Meath last week, and it's here again today. I think it's wrong to say that we're not concerned about global warming, climate change, and all that. We are being a coastal town. We're very cognizant of it, and we're always pushing for coastal defences and improvements around that area. My question would be to the executive: is there any ramifications of the removal of A1 existing residential? It's something that stumped me last week when it came up, that how could we remove existing residential zoning? Is there any ramifications against that? And then maybe if the other questions that Porrick has raised could be clarified, it would give me a little bit more knowledge on the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tolan. Just Councillor Smith, we'll be coming back to you for the clarification sought by the planning department. So if you just give you the time to kind of gather your thoughts on that. Councillor Tolan.
Thanks, Cahirlock. And look, I share Councillor Behan's point of view there in relation to going over old ground, and we had an extensive discussion there for 45 minutes in relation to opening up other motions. So I'm a bit, I suppose, flummoxed as to why we're discussing it all again. being somebody who lives out here like Councillor Behan and who's stood with my wellies on around in Northlands with families who are totally distraught with flooding, and indeed have had taken phone calls late at night from several areas. You know, I've seen the work that's gone on with the OPW, with the CFRAM consultation process. We filled halls down in Colosh and Ahincha for local people here living in the area who gave their views on this stream and that stream, and really gave those experts local knowledge. I'm not prepared to take any action today that's going to have an impact on somebody's ability to get a mortgage on their home, or somebody's ability to get insurance on their home that's already built, and that infrastructure, a considerable amount of millions has been spent on infrastructure to rectify flooding. If homes have already been built and A1 zoning is already there, existing residential, I am not prepared to dezone somebody's home. And I cannot see for the life of me on that map, and I know you had the map there with the flooding areas of A2 zoned lands that don't have extant planning permissions on and haven't already gone through the proper justification tests in relation to attenuation and flooding. We can all look ahead and wonder what this country and indeed world is going to look like in 60 years' time. Certainly the predictions I've seen online would say that my home, which is a kilometre from the beach, will be underwater. That's not something I can have a huge amount of impact on in this county development plan, but I can certainly impact the structural changes that are needed in relation to flood defence works, but not by dezoning people's homes that have already been built. Thanks a million, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Councillor. Again, just for clarification on the question why we're not revisiting motions, because we hadn't made a decision on any of this because all 4 motions had been withdrawn prior to a decision being made, just for clarification. But so we go back to Councillor Smith on this now. So Councillor Smith, there had been a number of questions raised about the motion.
Hi, I did ask, look, I know the wording is, I did ask for help with that. What I really would like to see is, you know, do we have experts where a buffer zone can be put in? Is it something that we can add into the development plan that, you know, it might necessarily be A1 lands they're already built on, and I understand that, but what I'm talking about is for future development. Are we going to future protect those who will build houses in the future? Is there an expert that can, you know, what is the recommended buffer zone around any area, whether it's the coast or whether it's the town or a city? You know, is it done in other counties? You know, is this something we can do in County Meath?
Thank you, Councillor.
I don't think there's anything else.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So we'll go back to Padraig now for clarification. The formal response as well, the Chief Executive's recommendation, and any information that you feel might be helpful to Councillor Smith and the rest of us in framing our vote, and then we'll go to a vote on the Chief Executive's recommendation. So Padraig, and then we'll go back to Councillor Smith, and then we'll vote.
Thank you, Chair. I guess there was sort of a couple of questions there. I think Councillor Behan raised a point regarding A1 zone land existing residential. And I suppose I put it back, if it's not existing residential, what is it? And that's a question. If you wanted to do something that's extraordinary and not the norm, that would be the case if you're looking to zone it something else. Even the rural area, every single field in County Meath is now zoned something. So if it's not something zoned within the settlement, it's in the rural area or rural remainder, and that is zoned. So it has to be called something, and it generally reflects what it currently is or what it should be, and that's future zoning. So that gives certainty to developers as to what they are considering. So the A1 residential zoning includes all those areas which are currently built upon, including the roads, the ancillary areas, grass, green areas, the houses themselves, the gardens, so public-private amenity space. So that's an explanation of what A1 effectively is. In terms of the zoning and referring to the buffer areas, firstly, I will say we take flooding very, very seriously. And when planning applications come in, and indeed members contact us to discuss issues with flooding or potential flooding, and members of the public and other people point out to us, it never flooded before, so what's your problem with it now? The reality is we have factored in future potential flooding and climate change into the mapping, into the development plan. And we've done all that, and that's what we have done in terms of the maps that's, you know, behind. There's a huge plethora of maps that's behind the zone maps which you are looking at. It's not just a case of showing colours on a map and that's it. So effectively, when looking at flooding, there are 3 key areas: flood zone A, B and C. Flood A refers to a 1 in 100 year flood, flood B refers to a 1 in 1,000 year flood, and area C refers to everything else. So effectively what we're saying is that the lands which are zoned new residential are in zone C, where, and that's in the development plan. When a planning application comes in on lands and there is even a potential flood risk adjoining, within or part thereof a field, our standard practice is to require the developer to provide a detailed specific flood risk assessment to actually categorically rule out the risk of any future flooding on this site. That test is much more stringent than the current test needed for the development plan, but the planning application one will rule in or rule out, and in the 3 areas it will identify flood zone, potential flood zone A, B, or is it actually C. So I'm trying not to get too detailed, and as I say, I'm not a flood engineer. However, I do understand obviously how it operates. So what I can say in answer to Councillor Smith's question is we have already factored all of this into our development plan. And if we look at coastal communities across the island of Ireland, we live on an island. Many of our settlements around the island of Ireland are prone to flooding, many much, much, much worse than what we see in County Meath. The future, we don't know, but on the basis of the scientific information that we're provided, we factor all that into our zoning and where we include zone lands for future use. So I can't state any buffer area that's required at this point. I don't know where it is. I don't know what size it should be, because I don't have any evidence. I don't have any analysis to tell me what it should be. So I can't answer the question, and ultimately and finally, the Chief Executive's recommendation is no change. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Councillor Smith, we'll go back to you.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Patrick. I suppose to have an expert to come in and you know, they determine the size of the buffer zone. I'd like to see this happen down the coast, because there is serious flooding, and I would ask the members to please support it. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you, Councillor. So we are going to go to a vote with regards to the Chief Executive's recommendation, which is no change necessary or no change recommended. So what we'll do is we can go with a show of hands. So I'll put the question to you in a second. If you're in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation of no change recommended, please indicate your decision now, please. Thank you, members. If you just lower your hands, please. If you could lower your hands, Councillors Riley, Dempsey and Bonner, thank you. Councillor Bonner. I'm just going to presume that Councillor Bonner has stepped away, so okay, and then in 1 second, just when Councillor Bonner's hand comes down, we're going to go and ask people. Okay, and if you're not in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation, please indicate that now. Okay, thank you very much. So it is a 21 in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation and 4 not in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation. If you could lower your hands, please, Councillor. We'll move on to the next notice of motion. Thank you very much. Notice of motion number 3, Councillor Sharon Tolan. If we have a seconder for that, please. Councillor Thomas Behan. Councillor Tolan.
Thanks a million, Catherlough. Are they going to bring up the motion there on screen?
Yeah,
just trying to.
So, and I'm going to make a slight amendment to this following an extensive discussion with a number of Meath County Council representatives, I suppose. So the motion should read: to zone lands identified as strategic employment site in Laytown west of the railway bridge from E2 to E1, and to make relevant changes to policies and objectives in relation to same. And to include, and I'm just removing the word spot there, so to include an objective to relocate the Meath County Council yard from the high amenity site on the Nanny Riverside. Include an objective, the Meath County Council depot to an alternative site in order to improve the high amenity site of its current location. Okay, so look, thanks, Catherlough. I think all of you will be familiar with the route from Julianstown into Laytown, and in particular the spectacular and important vista of the River Nanny running alongside the road from just past Sonarcha site all the way to Laytown. The road itself from Julianstown to just before Sonarcha is particularly poor, and indeed our transportation team are well aware that motorists have to actually stop their vehicles when they meet a bus or a large vehicle. This road, and indeed the village of Julianstown, cannot handle any more heavy vehicle goods that would be particularly associated with an E2 type business. And I don't believe we as a local authority should be encouraging any E2 type businesses to this location. The site itself is directly opposite the Nanny Estuary SAC, and obviously is also in close proximity to the Nanny Shore SPA. Those of you that are unsure, these are special areas of conservation and specially protected areas. They're home to an amazing selection of wildlife, in particular feeding birds, but also regularly seals and their pups, otters, herons, sanderlings, and so on. You'll have read submission NHC 5802 from the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, and the concerns they have in relation to E-type zoning on this location. The list for E2 includes abattoir, scrapyard, demolition and waste recycling facility, and I don't believe these are the best suited to this particularly special site. The site itself is also strategically located right next to Laytown train station, and obviously is close proximity to the now exceptionally large settlement of East Meath, the third largest town in the county. We need jobs, but we need to protect our environment. I believe an E1 zoning for this area is much more appropriate and would attract opportunities for more high-end technology and campus-style office-based employment, which is best suited for such an important area in need of protection, yet also strategically located on the Dublin to Belfast economic corridor and directly adjacent to the train station, which would provide easy access for inbound commuters and linkages to third-level institutions. I think our exceptional linkages to third-level institutions here in East Meath should be promoted more. Obviously, we've Dundalk Institute of Technology. It's on the pathway to becoming a technological university, and we're a 40-minute train journey to Dublin city centre. In relation to the relocation, the objective to relocate the council yard. The council yard is indicated there on that map with the red dot. It's a very, very small yard. I did write down what size, but it is tiny. It's less than a quarter of an acre, that's for sure. It's a particularly high amenity site, obviously right on the River Nanny there. And, you know, we only store small equipment and signage and stuff like that in it. There are no large vehicles stored in it, but it's just the wrong location. We need to make the most of that high amenity site. And I know that our public realm plan and indeed Laytown village enhancement would have great plans and uses for it as a park area and a bird watching area. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to support this motion, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. As we just go to the Chief Executive for the response and to the amended motion removing the spot objective. Padraig or Sean?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I suppose I will maybe consider the removal of the word spot, which effectively removes the location for the removal of the council yard. So what the objective would then mean specifically regarding the council yard is that it should move. It doesn't state as to where to or where it should move. And following completion of this, I will bring in maybe Des Foley just to confirm and provide a background to that. Looking specifically at the thrust of this norm, it is effectively to change the zoning on this strategic employment site from E2 to E1. I guess the net effect of that is obviously to change the type of uses that will be permitted on such lands. And indeed, yes, it is a strategic employment site. And I think you've heard me before referring to the fact that we need to get more employment brought into East Meath due to the significant residential growth and population that has occurred in recent decades. And I think this site is to be very much welcomed in terms of bringing employment opportunities. I suppose I would caution the need to consider just what the proposal is doing, and members should be aware. There is the zoning matrix, obviously, which outlines in detail what E1 and E2 will permit as a permitted use, and then other uses which are open for consideration. I think what's also of relevance is the discussion that ensued on similar type lands in Ashburn and Trim previously. I would state here that on the basis of our experiences and the discussion with the members throughout this process, that E1 will certainly limit the uses to which this site can be used. And E2 is effectively the older type zone in which it could include sort of heavier industry, and it is a sensitive site. However, I would caution that any application on this site will be subject to detailed assessments, both in terms of transportation services, be that water, wastewater, and particularly on the environmental side, whether any application of a particular size would trigger the need for an environmental impact assessment, and effectively screening would have to be carried out on it, and particularly relating to the Habitats Directive.
Yeah, I can see myself. Yeah.
And they would have to be carried out on any application on these lands.
Sometimes the cameras do freeze, don't they?
Sorry, there's someone coming in there.
Sorry, if everybody could ensure that your microphones are on mute. Thank you. Sorry, Padraig.
So finally, to conclude, it will be over to the members, but given the strategic importance of this site and the need, in my opinion, not to limit the opportunities, I think a better option here may be a hybrid version, which we discussed before, which would be a hybrid of E1, E2 zoning, and not refer to any specific area where for E1, E2, but to just allow E1, E2 uses and allow then the development management process to determine such uses. And I suppose something that I've come to learn in recent days, I've the economic development section of Meath County Council working for us and looking what we have been told in the last couple of days regarding what type of business, what type of companies are looking to come to County Meath, and we have found that obviously storage and warehousing is a significant need, and I guess what I would like to see happen here is completely limit the opportunities for some of those businesses looking potentially to relocate, either as a result of Brexit or as a result of running out of space in Dublin or elsewhere. And the M1 corridor is obviously a significant attraction to many companies. So I do accept Councillor Tolan's point around potential traffic issues, and Julianstown is a particular problem, but all that would be assessed as part of a planning application anyhow. So to conclude, I would suggest a hybrid option of E1, E2 zoning, which gives us the opportunity to look at either use on site and deal with it as it comes. And I think it's a better option, and that would be the recommendation of the Chief Executive, having reflected on it and discussed it with Economic Development Section and looking at companies who would like to come into Meath. And I think that is our key priority: get companies in, and if there are any issues arising, they will be teased out at the development management or planning application stage. So I'll conclude and maybe refer you to Des Foley regarding the Council Depot.
Just would acknowledge over the course of your contribution there, Patrick, you froze maybe 3 or 4 times. So just to ensure. So again, I would remind people that any posturing that would suggest that there's a recording of the meeting taking place will result in the exclusion of those people who are deemed to be behaving in a manner in which they may be recording the meeting in any way, shape or form, even if it is just may appear as if they are. So I would remind anybody, whether they're members of the chamber or members of the public, that that you must adhere to the strict rules with regards to the recording of meetings. Thank you very much. Sorry, Des.
Yes, Cathaoirleach, thank you. The amended wording to the motion is satisfactory in that the council is actively looking for an alternative site for the council depot. So without indicating, as per the original motion, where that might be, it's preferable to leave it open for us to investigate further in terms of the most suitable location. And just to point out that the yard is currently located, is a shared space between the council and Irish Water, and since the transfer of functions to Irish Water, the yard itself is actually in the ownership of Irish Water, while the council own lands to the rear of the yard itself. So just to point out that, but overall the amended wording does meet our own requirements, and we will continue to look for an alternative location. Thanks, Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Des. Just for clarity before we open to the floor, so the recommendation from the Chief Executive is to accept the change, subject to a hybrid of E1 and E2 zoning. Yeah, so I just need to clarify what exactly the recommendation is to ensure that Councillor Tolan is happy, and then we'll progress with the discussion about the motion itself. So it's just Councillor Tolan, you want to come back in here too?
Yeah, it was just to clarify that hybrid. Is that the entire strategic employment site? Is that the Chief Executive's recommendation that it will be E1 stroke E2?
That's correct.
Okay. You're happy with that, Councillor?
I am very happy with that, yeah.
Okay, so that's the Chief Executive's recommendation. So, Councillor Meath.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and it's very good to hear the Chief Executive's proposal. You might remember last week I had motion 137 about this site and about trying to encourage jobs into this area. One of the biggest problems I see in Laytown Bettystown area is that the majority of the working force is commuting to Dublin, and that's a very high majority in the area. And so we desperately need jobs into this area. And anything we can do to encourage that, and that's where I think a hybrid is definitely the best option, because we need to attract any sort of jobs there at the moment, because at the moment it doesn't look like there's too many businesses interested in coming there. And I note that from the manager's response, where they say due to the proximity of the area to Drogheda and Dublin, it may be challenging to attract large-scale employers. And that's in the manager's response in relation to this site on my motion. So if the hybrid can encourage more, that should be very much welcomed. And of course, every planning application that goes in will take into account the sensitivities of the area. But I do think this is the right move. Personally, I think we should have more zoned land in the area for jobs in case this site doesn't move quick enough. But what we're doing in this motion is a good thing, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Behan.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Yeah, just to add on to the previous speakers, that I would like to agree with this motion. I believe it is the right thing to do. I also agree with the dual zoning of E1, E2. I think this is a fantastic opportunity to bring employment to the site. And indeed, under the zoning, we could indeed include hot desk units in that, which might retain some employment in the area. So people who are commuting out might be able to facilitate or use facilities such as hot desking units if they were to be developed on the site. So I believe it's a very good motion, and I'd ask the members to support this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So what we're going to do now is we have a Chief Executive recommendation to accept the change. So what we're going to do is seek your agreement with that. So if we could return to the, we go back to Councillor Tolan again, just to clarify you're happy enough to proceed, and then we're going to go to the vote.
Absolutely, Cathaoirleach. I mean, you know, everybody, and I'm particularly happy that the executive has consistently said this county development plan, the focus for East Meath is jobs and retrofitting the necessary infrastructure and community facilities that are needed. So I definitely think that the dual use of E1, E2 will significantly improve the attractiveness of this site for business and for jobs. And I think that's what we really need to do now is go out and sell Laytown, Bettystown as an attractive place to do business and to commute to rather than from. So thanks very much for everybody's support, and yeah, thanks to the Chief Executive as well for the recommendation, and Padraig. Can I just mention too, huge amount of work gone on from all of the planners. Obviously, I want to particularly thank Conor for his patience with maps and the time that Padraig took with me to sit down and discuss different issues over the last number of months. I know heads must be melted at this stage, but we appreciate the work and effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So what we'll do is put the question to you. If you're in agreement in a moment, if you're in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation to accept the amended motion, please indicate you're in agreement now. Thank you, councillors. If you could lower your hands, please. Thank you. And if you're not in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation, please indicate that now. Excellent. Thank you very much. So that is 28 in agreement, nobody in disagreement. So the motion carries. So we move on. Notice of motion number 5 is already related to some we've already dealt with. Notice of motion 6. Notice of motion 6. Councillor Stephen McKee. So if we get a seconder for the motion, please. Have we a seconder for the motion, please? Fanny, could you indicate their seconding of the motion, please? Councillor Damien O'Reilly, thank you. Councillor McKee.
Just wait for the motion to be put up so I can see it. Please, thanks, Sean. Okay, so this motion relates to, don't know if you have the map there, relates to a portion of land in Donacarney. The motive behind the motion really is to provide amenity space for St. Columkille's GF Gaelic Football Club. We know there's not only is there lack of jobs in the area, as been mentioned in the previous motion, but a severe lack of community amenities for young people in East Meath. St. Columkille's Gaelic Football Club, as the largest local sporting group, are themselves in need of additional lands. In fact, the club are literally at a crisis point in terms of the lack of lands they have to cater for over 2,500 members, 60 teams, and they need additional lands. And the work that club is doing in the area cannot be overstated in terms of not only providing Gaelic football for young people, but also the community outreach. They provide the land free of charge to local schools. They're very much involved in health and wellbeing initiatives in the East Meath area. So what I'm looking to do through this motion is to zone some land residential, and as part of that, there would be 10 acres made available to St. Columkille's Gaelic Football Club, pending a legal agreement between the landowner and the club, and that the lands would be provided free of charge as part of this agreement with between St. Columkille's and the landowner. I think the site itself, location itself, is a good location in terms of its proximity to local schools, and I think there is, as I said, St. Columkille's at the moment only have currently at 6 acres in Piltown. I am aware of a submission that St. Columkille's have put in for lands in Bettystown, which they're hoping to acquire. The reality is, and hopefully they do acquire those lands, but they've been waiting for about 15 years for those lands. And the reality is that 10 acres here doesn't even solve their problems. They need about 30 acres in total. So if they were able to get 10 acres here, if they were able to get 10 acres in Bettystown, then even then, they're still short of their capacity needs. So it's not a case of one over the other. They actually need both the lands in Bettystown, and there's been no firm commitment from the landowner in Bettystown that they will receive those lands. I know that the councillor are keen that they will be for community use, which is fantastic, but the club itself, I'm not sure of that. No commitments, as I said, on that land. So simply what I'm trying to do with this motion is to acquire some land, 10 acres, as part of this. And essentially, there is an option here that that the housing, if the housing itself is too much on that land, that housing could be reduced. And so really what I'm looking at there is the front of that site. I don't know if you can zoom in on front of the site. The front portion of the site could be developed upon with 10 acres. The front portion of that site is approximately it would end up being basically 15 acres for residential development and 10 acres for sport for St. Columkille's. So I'm asking members to seriously consider this in terms of providing local amenities to St. Columkille's for the community and for St. Columkille's, who are the club, I suppose, with the biggest capacity in terms of developing facilities in the area. But also keep in mind that it's not only for Gaelic football; it would be for community use as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. It's 14.7 hectares, not acres. Is that right? As per the motion?
Yeah, 30. Yeah, but I'm willing to put down an amendment to that to only consider the front part of the site, so which would reduce the housing, but would keep the 10 acres. So we're looking at 10 acres for sport, 10 acres zoned for recreation, pending legal agreement with St. Columkille's for use for St. Columkille's, and 15 acres for housing, which is quite a substantial amount of community land, given the certain 25 acres, which is close to half of the site being made available for community use.
Okay, we'll get a response from the CE.
Thank you, Cahir. Look, it's Alan here. I'll just give some background detail in relation to the St. Columcille submission, which was submission number 527. In that submission, reference is made to land to the west of the new link road to Laytown. It specifically identifies 3 fields, which I'll now identify. It is these 3 fields here. They're to the west of the town centre, and the club did state in their submission number 527 that an area of approximately 23 acres has the approval of the club to acquire and develop this area into GA playing pitches if the area can be transferred to the club. So there was a submission received from St. Columcille's in relation to these open space areas here, and under the open space zoning, playing pitches and community facilities such as the football club will be proposing can be facilitated there. The subject lands are also referred to in Objective 23 located in the written statement, which is to support the development of the land zoned F1 open space south of Bettystown town centre as a sporting facility. So that is these lands here. In relation to the lands which this motion refers to, this is the lands here which I'm now identifying. These are related to submission 735. Submission 735 requested the rezoning of 14.7 hectares of these lands from rural area to A2 new residential. There was no mention under submission 735 of any open space zoning or the facilitation of playing pitches for St. Columcille's at that point. It's the executive's view that the centrally located lands at Bettystown are more preferable. They are adjacent to the town centre and more appropriate, will be openly accessible via the new spine road, which I'm identifying there now on the map. And the town centre is in recognised need of regeneration, and the development of a sporting facility would increase the vibrancy and footfall at this location and help bring life back into the town centre area there too. So it's the executive's view that the lands at Bettystown are the ideal location for the playing pitches. In relation to the motion for rezoning these lands for open space to facilitate two playing pitches and residential, the executive would not be in favour of such a proposal. The emphasis on the draft plan is to catch up with community facilities, infrastructure and jobs for the settlements in East Meath. And as you can see on the map here, the zoning of these lands would result in the joining of the zonings between Donacarney and South Drogheda, which is not promoted or encouraged by the RSES. It strongly recommends against any such zonings, which would result in the joining of settlements, as we stated last week. Additional zoning of the scale proposed also at this location would be contrary to the objective to achieve a compact urban settlement and would be contrary to the sequential approach. The lands which were subject to the motion last week are identified there above as well, and it can be seen that these lands are even extend further out from the development envelope of Donacarney. The motion has not also put forward any lands to be replaced, so there is no land swap proposed as part of the motion. So the Chief Executive's recommendation is no change required or recommended in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I'll go back to Councillor McKee. Nobody else has indicated they wish to speak. Councillor McKee, and then we'll go to a vote. Oh. Councillor McGuinty, hold on just 1 second, Councillor McGee. We come out, we get some input from the floor, if that's okay with you, Councillor McGuinty.
Thanks, Conor. I'm glad you clarified the amount of acres and hectares. I was a bit confused myself. So based on Councillor McKee's proposal, so 14.7 hectares would translate into 36 acres. So 10 of which is proposed to give to Columcille's, 26 then would remain zoned, if I'm right in hearing that. I'd just like to know, does Councillor McKee, can you tell us who owns this land? Who is he making this on behalf of? And also, I agree with, so far we've had the one in, one out, and it's been very consistent, I think, throughout the plan. So if these lands are to be zoned, no more than Councillor Smith this morning trying to put in an alternative, where is your alternative for the diesel T-zoning to complement this one in, one out? So who owns the land, and where is the alternative? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGuinty. Councillor Tolan.
Thank you, Carla. Can I just ask for Rory's possible advice in relation to whether or not, I mean, a lot of us have attended the OPR's training in relation to county development plans and zoning and planning matters. Am I right in saying that there is no legislative basis in zoning land for community gain, as in zoning residential land on the basis of a quid pro quo for community gain, and therefore there would not be a possibility of having a legal agreement in place? My understanding is on many occasions there have been agreements made verbally with other landowners around the country and not followed through. Not saying that this would be the case in relation to this piece of land, but am I right in saying in the Salons case that the justification for zoning lands for residential, while there was a community gain to be had on part of the land, that it was overturned by judicial review? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Meath.
Thank you, Kahira. I suppose every decision we make here is very complex. In this area, we should be very aware that Column Kills are now a senior football team, and they do have a very growing membership. And there is need, definitely, for pitches in the area. That all taken into account, I suppose where this is going to come down to with a lot of the councillors when we come to a vote is that idea of one in, one out. And this is where I go back to the previous thoughts about the flood areas around Bettystown and Mornington as I would see them, and not maybe as council see them, but as I would see them in the future. We really need to be taking bits out in flood areas or in South Drogheda where we do not want to see housing. And I suppose maybe if Stephen, as the bringer of the motion, might be able to highlight some lands that he would agree with to remove with me, we could then be on a road, a better road towards seeing the other councillors back this. It's just something maybe to consider, that if the proposer, and I'm only saying it to try and assist them, because I think a lot of the councillors are off the mind it's one in, one out. So just thought I'd add that into the debate. Thank you.
So just to pick up on a point there for Councillor Meath, this was a very specific point around Councillor Smith's motion last week about starting to identify lands during the course of the meeting. That's not something that we can because it wasn't something that was allowed when Councillor Smith brought it. We certainly won't be identifying lands now. Just to clarify that suggestion as you made there, Councillor. So we'll go back. Councillor Tolan asked the question specifically of planning, and Councillor McGuinty asked a question to the floor, presumably aimed at Councillor McGuinty, or Councillor McKee. So Councillor McKee, unfortunately, is not available. Maybe Rory might come in, and I see until Councillor McKee comes back.
Yes, Councillor Tolan asked some questions about community gain, and she referred to the Salons case. While the developer in Salons did propose making lands available for community gain, the Salons case actually centred on the core strategy and the obligation to comply with this core strategy and sequential approach to zoning lands. But separately, there has been a High Court judgment that you cannot effectively sell planning permission in return for community gain. So community gain is not the criteria. The criteria is the suitability of the land for the proposed usage, having regard to proper planning and development. And it would be wrong of the members to reach a decision based on the possibility of getting a community gain in terms of free land from a developer. So it's not a consideration that should come into it. It's more the suitability of the land for the proposed use to which it's suggested it be zoned. And of course, also Alan's point, and you've mentioned it, Cathaoirleach, is because we have a core strategy and we have a limit on the amount of lands we can zone, if we are zoning extra lands, well then we have to jettison some residential zoning elsewhere, and that needs to be identified with a map and some justification assessment as to why one particular piece is more appropriate to residential zoning than the other. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Rory.
Thank you, Rory. So we go back to planning. If there's any comment, Councillor McKee is still not on the line, so what we might do is give him another minute or two, and then we might move on. We might pause this motion to allow him to get reconnected rather than being absent from any discussion. Move on to the next motion, which is Councillor McKee as well. So if we can't get Councillor McKee in the next minute, we may maybe go through he's back. Excellent. Good news. Councillor McKee has returned. Worry not, everybody. He's in the waiting room.
And missed the contributions and guidance from.
So yeah, we'll just hold on. Is he back, Shomra?
Just ask him to raise his hand and then he'll go to the top.
Councillor McKee, are you in the room?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Sorry about that. Just the
So-
power of my device.
No problem. So we're just going to go back to what Rory had raised an element. Did you hear Councillor Tolan's question with regards to where did you lose us?
I didn't hear Paddy Mead or Sharon Tolan.
Okay, so Councillor Mead, if you want to just repeat to Councillor, because he had said something specifically to you, which is not allowed, which we won't be allowing.
I just to be in brief, I suppose there's a desperate need for the Column Kills to get land in the area. While some of the local councillors may be supporting you on this, I think a lot of the councillors in the main believe in this one in, one out policy. And I was thinking, if you were to support some of my ideas about on zoning what I deem to be floodlands in Laytown, Bettystown, or the high density places in Drogheda, maybe if you were to be agreeing in the future that we would be on zoning them lands, it would allow this to be zoned. But maybe you don't feel like identifying such lands.
And just, Councillor, before you come in, Councillor McKee, before you come in there, Councillor McKee, just again, I would remind you that this conversation took place last week with Councillor Smith. It wasn't allowed to go through the maps in the meeting to identify lands. The lands that you're going to swap out should be identified during outside the meeting. So that the Councillor Mead's suggestion is not in order. And Councillor Tolan also made if you could repeat your comment, Councillor Tolan, just so your question, and then we'll go back to Rory, who had an answer, and then we'll proceed.
I will. I suppose I raised the issue in relation to previous judgments made and whether or not there's legislative basis to zone residential land, new residential land as quid pro quo for community gain. And I referenced, I suppose, the OPR training that some of us have attended in relation to county development plans and planning and regulations, and I suppose some of the things we learned on that planning in relation to whether or not there was a legislative basis to hold a landowner to his or her word in relation to a promise or a gift of land in exchange for zoning residential. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And also, just before we go to Rory, I don't know if there's a number of points that just have to get to you first to make sure that you know what happened while you were away. Councillor McGinty also had asked who owned the land. So, Rory, we'll bring you in just to answer the point raised by Councillor Tolan.
Yeah, Councillor McKee. Yes, or McKee, sorry. I made the point that community gain is not an appropriate consideration when you come to zoning the lands. What you need to look at is the suitability of the lands for any particular proposed land use objective or zoning, and that it's an improper consideration to allocate zoning because purely of a promise of some other community gain, such as free lands from a developer. There has been a High Court case to the effect that you cannot sell, for want of a better word, planning permission in return for such a community gain.
Sorry, Rory, Councillor McKee has left the building again.
Okay.
So, now as he indicated, his battery went in his device. That's why he Councillor Toole.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach, and also to Mr. McEntee. Then can I just, by extrapolation, can I ask then, is it considered appropriate for roadways, etc., to be achieved through
Councillor, just while Councillor McKee is not here, we'll just wait for Councillor McKee to come back, give him every opportunity to come back as reasonable, so he can hear the points. If he's yes, Councillor McGinty.
Thank you, Councillor McKee. It was ownership, and also when you asked about the hectares, I translated it into acres.
Okay, but just Councillor, it is very important. Well, as I said, Councillor McKee is not here, so we have to wait for Councillor McKee. So we just wait for Councillor McKee to come back, give him every opportunity, and then we'll come back into that. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
So we'll give Councillor McKee an opportunity to come back in, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then. Okay, so he'll be back with us in 2 minutes. It's just there's a problem with his device, and it is of course it's proper that we would give him the opportunity to come back in, this being his motion, and that he would be able to hear everything, all the commentaries and contributions from everyone in the room. So we just give him 1 minute. So maybe we can't ask for clarification from the CE on anything because Councillor McKee is not here. We will maybe just.
Would you like me to think?
So we put it to a vote. I'm joking. So what we'll do is we just if you just bear with us for 2 minutes, and then when Councillor McKee comes back in, we pick up from where he disappeared, which was just before Rory was in the middle of explaining that community gain element of it, and that is not deemed to be an appropriate way to essentially, as Rory said, sell land or exchange land for planning. So, Councillor McKee, you're back. Good man.
Yeah.
Good to see you again. So we'll go back to Rory, and then there's other people who would like to have a word with you. Rory.
Councillor McKee, just in summary, I was saying that when you come to consider the appropriate land use objective for land that is zoning, it has to be on the basis of the suitability of the lands for that particular usage or objective. And it shouldn't be assessed on the basis of a promise or a commitment by a landowner or developer to make free lands available to the a community organisation or whatever. That is not the relevant criteria to be considered. And there is a High Court case which effectively says that you cannot sell planning permission in return for community gain. You have to look at the appropriateness of the land for the use to which you propose applying to it. And secondly, as has been repeated throughout this process, we are operating under a core strategy where we are limited with the amount of residential land that we can make available. And the planners in preparing the draft plan have used up that limit, so there's no excess. And if you want to zone further lands residential, then there has to be land out. That land has to be identified by reference to a map, but not only identified, but an assessment as to why it's more appropriate to zone the new land residential rather than the portion you're proposing to take out. So I hope that helps clarify that particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Rory. So Councillor Toole, you had a question. Again, I would ask you to keep it to, there's no mention of a road in this application, so you had indicated that you wanted to mention a road when you were talking about it. So
Garv Mahagat the Cahirlig. I know there isn't a road in this instance,
Yeah.
so it's just in relation to the consideration of what's appropriate and what's not. Because as we know, Meath is one of the most underfunded counties in the country, despite a high level of representation in Leinster House. So heretofore, a lot of projects have come to fruition because of a trade-off, for want of a better phrase. And I know that the provision of infrastructure is treated as such. We have a couple of roads around Ratoath that actually aren't public, but they're still private. So I'm just wondering how does the context, how can it be extrapolated to the provision of infrastructure, and yet it can't be a consideration of community gain? If we've learned nothing since 2020 when SARS-CoV-2 struck, is the vital importance of community facilities to our residents. Garv Mahagat.
thank you, Councillor. Councillor McGinty.
Garv Mahagat Cahirlig. I'd like to echo the sentiments about the Columkills. I think they do need support, but this particular motion by Councillor McKee refers to 14.7 hectares. That translates into 36 acres. So if 10 were given to the Columkills, that would leave 26 for residential. And I'd like to know, Councillor McKee, who owns this land? Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor McKee, there's a specific question asked directly to you, and then no, any questions that may arise, we'll take them as they arise.
Just thanks, Rory, for that. Look, the spirit of the motion is essentially to try and provide community facilities in Donacarney, in an area where essentially we're really lacking in terms of providing the social infrastructure for the young people. So the spirit of the motion is essentially to try and attempt to do just that. I take on board what Councillor Meath said in relation to other lands, and maybe it's something we can look at in relation to the local area plan in future. I'd be very interested in discuss in terms of flooding and areas that maybe could be dezoned, and it's something we can come back to. In terms of the legislation that was mentioned by Councillor Tolan, my motion does state in it that pending a legal agreement. I mean, in the motion, that this could only, I'd only be looking for this to happen unless, if there's a steadfast legal agreement in place that land would be made available to St. Columkills. In terms of the land itself, I did say at the very start, and just to clarify, I had amended the motion to say what we're looking at is actually not the full amount, would actually be, and I just want to make this very, very clear, if it's not clear, is that 10 acres would be for sport and 15 acres for residential development. So it's not the huge amount that's been mentioned by someone else. I was amending that for 10 acres for sport and 15 in total. So 25 acres. And I just make that very clear. Look, I'm willing to. I look based on what I've heard, the opinions, and I take on board all the opinions, the point of view, and so on, and particularly from Rory as well. Look, I just wanted, it's something that definitely needs to be addressed. I have another motion next in relation to community facilities in the area, and that's my whole focus is to provide community facilities in the East Meath area, and look, hopefully, as a result of this motion, and I'm going to withdraw the motion in terms of I don't want to go into a vote, is that there we will have a commitment given there that land in Bettystown, that there is a submission, and I would have been aware of the submission in Bettystown, is that certainly we can move on that and provide that land for St. Columkills, because they're a wonderful sporting organisation providing an unbelievable community outlet for young people in the area and community aid reach. So that's my focus, is providing that community infrastructure in the area. So I'd like to, on that note, withdraw the motion. Certainly look forward to working with other councillors and in the local area development plan. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. So just, have we got is everyone in agreement that that Councillor McKee can withdraw his motion because it had formally been proposed and seconded? Councillor McGinty, not speaking on the motion, it's just because it's withdrawn now. Just, has anyone got an issue with the withdrawal of the motion? Okay.
Sorry, I've asked 4 times who owns the land.
Who owns the land? Yeah, so there's a specific question.
4 times.
Chairman, are we zoning the name of
Sorry,
the person or the
sorry,
land?
Councillor Tormey. Sorry, Councillor Tormey.
Yeah, but why do we need
He's
to know
withdrawn.
if the land was
He's
zoned?
withdrawn. He's withdrawn the motion.
Yeah, but that's what. But
Well, Councillor, he's withdrawn the motion. So,
Yeah.
Councillor McGuinty, the name of the owner of the land is not relevant necessary. Is it deemed by the meeting? I don't know, but the motion is withdrawn now, so any further discussion is not necessary. So, unless anyone does disagreement that the motion should not be withdrawn. Okay, thank you very much. So we move on to. It is just for clarity though. It is appropriate if people ask for, if they want to know it, make a decision on something. So it is, unless it's maybe they have a conflict of interest that they'd like to identify themselves. So it's important that these are parts and parcel of the discussions if somebody had that. So thank you. So number 7 is done. So then we move on to notice of motion number 8. Councillor Stephen McKee. Do we have a seconder for that motion?
We've dealt with this one before. This was part of the joint motion.
That's 7. This is number 8, Steve, Councillor McKee. This is the
okay.
notice of motion. Donacarney East Meath lands with the star objective. Yeah. So
Yes.
seconder the motion, Councillor Damien Riley. Councillor McKee.
Okay, and just to clarify, and this is a general statement I'd like to make there, if there is any conflict of interest on my part, I would absolutely clarify that. So I don't want to be insinuation that there is a conflict of interest.
Councillor, I think what Councillor McGuinty was saying, in case anyone else in the room has a conflict of interest, it's not necessarily,
Okay,
you're obviously familiar with the process, with the owner of the land because you're passing the motion and you've done your due diligence, but people may not have had the opportunity to do that. So there's no suggestion that anyone has any conflict of interest. As you know, if you have a conflict of interest, it's up to yourself to declare it. No one else's business.
Absolutely, and
well, not no one else's business, but no one else's job to declare it.
Okay, the next, I suppose the second notice of motion I have this afternoon, again, focus on community facilities, the provision of community facilities in Donacarney. The lands on the map there, I don't know if it's the star objective land that's been identified it's council-owned land in the centre of Donacarney, and I have a motion there that the provision there would be for community infrastructure on that land. In particular, I would like to see the possibility of a community centre. I think the location itself is an ideal location for a community centre and a playground. Donacarney really lacking in terms of community infrastructure, and I think the particular site is an ideal site within walking distance of, it's very close to the church, within walking distance of all the main housing developments in that area. And I think there's a real opportunity for Meath County Council, as it's been council-owned land, for us to do something really important in that area, the provision of a community. I would certainly suggest a community centre. I think the land is probably about 6 or 7 acres, would be a community centre and a playground. And I'd like to hear maybe the views of Pork on that. Now, I don't understand fully whether there's a proposal is for what sort of housing. If there is social housing, I'm supportive of social housing as well, an element of social housing on that. If that is the council's intention to provide council social housing, I think that would be important as well. But I'd like to hear from Pork exactly what the plans are, because I put the motion down really not knowing exactly what the council's intention were on it, and then I'd be able to come back on it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. So we get a response from the CE.
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. Firstly, I'll just clarify that this is, I believe, the third and remaining piece of land that was zoned white land with a master plan boundary and a star objective. The other two, which were Ashburn and Kells, which we've already dealt with, and now we're dealing with the final piece. During the consultation process and on reflection and on legal guidance, we looked at this, and the star objective to determine the future use of it by way of a master plan is not a legal process. It is not good planning. And therefore, we had to look at what are the options. So in the Chief Executive's report, there was a submission on this land, and this land was actually changed from the star objective white lands to A2 residential. And that was based on the fact that The lands adjacent is a housing development that is currently under construction, and many of the houses are now occupied. So it is effectively no longer entirely A2 new residential. So the appropriate area of that site was zoned A1, and there was therefore a quantum of land in A2 which could be allocated elsewhere. This is an adjacent site of council-owned land, which is in the centre of Donacarney and is now, under the Chief Executive's report, currently zoned A2. There is a proposal to locate circa 30 social housing units on a plan for this site, together with relevant community facilities. So it's very much needed, obviously, in Donacarney and East Meath, as we've already alluded to the fact it requires investment in infrastructure, and particularly in community facilities. So the A2 zoning will have a multi-purpose. Under the zoning matrix, it allows a significant number of uses under permitted uses and open for consideration. Obviously, social housing would be permitted on it, and whether there's slightly more, slightly less houses required, that will be determined when a part application is completed for the lands. But remaining lands will be facilitated. Any type of community use will be open for consideration and which shall be permitted on such lands. So the tract of land you can see outlined in blue, the outlined, I guess, on the left-hand side was what was in the draft plan. On the right-hand side is the result of the Chief Executive's amendments. So it is now zoned A2. We consider it appropriate. In terms of relating that to Councillor McKee's proposal, Councillor McKee's proposal is to zone it, I think, exclusively F1, which we don't consider necessary, because I think we all have the same objective here of providing community facilities. So the member and members, in fact, and the executive are at one in terms of providing community uses on this site, together with identified need for social housing. So I think we're all in agreement, and I guess it's not considered necessary to amend the Chief Executive's report as outlined. And therefore, everything that I think Councillor McKee wants or needs for the area can be accommodated here, and that's the key point. And maybe I'll go back to Councillor McKee on that. So the recommendation of the Chief Executive is no change. Thank you.
Thank you, Pádraig. Councillor Tolan.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and thanks, Pádraig, for that comprehensive outline of the site. We've been in discussions many times in relation to this site with various planners, and indeed with Donacarney United FC, who are in badly need of a bit of expansion there, notwithstanding the needs of St. Columkills. I think their eye on the prize is in Bettystown, but certainly I would not promote an entirety of housing on this site. It is council-owned land, and I trust the word of the planners and indeed the executive in relation to providing community facilities on this land, together with an element of social housing, which is badly in need also in the area. So I won't be in a position to support this motion, having, I suppose, looked at the maps and the up-to-date maps, and also being privy to the discussions in relation to the site and the plans for the site, all going well. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Meath.
Sorry, Cathaoirleach. Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I think it's a very worthy motion in many ways, and we can see Councillor McKee trying to deliver community facilities to his area. I think the council obviously have a need for council housing as well, and that should be acknowledged. I suppose as councillors, like, assuming half of it or a portion of it is going to community, the question can be raised, well, why leave that bit zoned residential? At least if the part of it that was going to be used for community was zoned community, it would give us more security maybe into the future. Now, I know that's not what the motion is, and that's not what the management's saying, that's somewhere down the middle, but maybe that's what really should be done here. I note in a similar comparison in Donore at one time what land was zoned with a green space in it, and then it didn't happen. But so maybe if some of this was shown this community, it would give a bit more certainty. Now, not to say I don't trust the council that this won't play out the way we want it, but it would give us a level of certainty. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McKee, again, just to this is wholly owned by the local authority, this piece of land, just for clarity. Yes?
Yeah.
Just making reference to Councillor Meath's point, just kind of for my own way, it just
Do
confused
we
me
all have a
slightly.
conflict of interest then?
Yeah, well, that's no. It's no, just for clarity, because it's suggestion that there would need to be a designation of one designation or another when the provision, the council is obviously part of providing community services as well. So, thank you very much, Councillor Behan.
Thank you, Cahirlock. Just wanted to welcome the Chief Executive's response there. Obviously, the way it's zoned will, as Padraig has outlined, it'll deliver social housing, which is much needed in the area, but it will also give us the opportunity to expand with the community developments that we might need in the area. So I support the Chief Executive's recommendation on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll just go back to Councillor McKee and then we'll go to a vote. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cahirlock. Look, as has been said, look, I said it's council owned land. So look, my focus entirely on this motion and on other motions is simply the provision of community facilities in Donacarney where they're really badly needed. I've spoken to Padraig already, and look, I'll take the Meath County Council in good faith on this in terms of the intention for this site. Certainly, I think a certain amount of social housing, a small amount perhaps, given that there's a limited enough site, would be adequate and totally appropriate, I think. But I think it's really, really important that there's adequate space on this site for the provision of community facilities. I personally like to see a playground put there. I think there's scope as well for community centre, new community centre Donacarney as well. So I'll work with Meath County Council on this and particularly with the local area plan as well further down the road. And I'm not going to put a vote in when really I've spoken to the council and Padraig on it, and they've given me their commitment on it in terms of what's going to be provided. So I don't think it'd be appropriate to do a vote. So I'll withdraw the motion on that basis, and with good faith, look forward to working with the council to provide much needed facilities in Donacarney for all our residents. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. So formally, we need to the room will need to agree that. So anybody not in agreement with the withdrawal of Councillor McKee's notice of motion? Okay, thank you, councillors. So we move on now. That we go to Sean now for the submissions.
Thank you. Here, look. In relation to Laytown, Bettystown, Donacarney and Mornington area, 37 submissions were received, 28 where no changes recommended, 7 where a change has been recommended, and 2 where a part change has been recommended. And that's the list of submissions there, Cahirlock.
If you could just pop them up on the screen, please.
Oh, sorry, it's not sharing with you. Apologies.
So we just need a once the 28 with no change recommended, we get a proposer and seconder for that, please.
Proposed, Cahirlock.
Proposed, Councillor Thomas Behan. Seconder, Councillor Tolan.
Yeah, can I just clarify that any of the motions that we previously dealt with that are in relation to those change recommended or no change recommended or part change recommended override any votes on these submissions?
Absolutely. Any ones that are linked presumably have an impact. Yeah. Sean, if you just clarify that, please.
Not that we're aware of at the minute. However, any change through a motion, I suppose, takes precedence over a submission. So even if we do say no change here, but the motion has changed, it will be rectified within the minute of the meeting that it was a change. Thank you.
Great.
Okay, everybody clear? So we need a seconder for the. So sorry, Councillor Tolan. So if we could go back, we need a vote, show of hands on a vote. So if we go back to the voting page, we've got it.
You know, I wasn't seconding that. I was just making my point.
Okay, so we need a seconder for that.
I do want to make one further point on one of the changes, if I may.
We do. Just before we can discuss it, we need to formally propose and second it. So if we have a seconder for that, please.
Okay, seconder then. I'll second that. And I'll
Councillor
just make a
Tolan,
point.
thank you very much. Now, Councillor Tolan.
I do want to just outline my concern in relation to one submission. MHC 5779 submitted by James Gillen in relation to the zoning there on the seafront to B1 lands, town centre lands. My understanding, that side of the road is in a high amenity area. It's right next to the beach. The other side of the road, by all means.
I can interrupt for 2 seconds.
Sure.
Sorry,
Yes.
Councillor Tolan. I'm not sure if this will clarify as a conflict of interest, but that's actually my boss's land.
So I think it would that be, Rory, might just get clarification on that? So.
My apologies, Cahill, I was making a cup of tea.
So there's a query with regards to submission 779, and Councillor Behan has asked a question with regards to his boss owns that land. So that's a conflict.
I think on balance he should treat it as a conflict, because the perception would be there's a very close connection between the councillor and the person who could benefit from the decision that ultimately made. And I recollect that another councillor had made a similar declaration earlier on in the process. So I would suggest to Councillor Behan that he go to the waiting room and get his cup of tea.
So Councillor Behan had proposed the taking of the submissions. So we need a new, while Councillor Behan readies himself for off, if we could get another proposer for the taking of the submissions, please. Councillor Tommy Riley. Thank you. So again, just for clarification, the point that was raised there, it's just very important that everybody is familiar with the 28 notice or submissions that we're taking as group. And if, as indicated by Councillor Behan, he has a conflict in a group of submissions, if any other councillor could be, as sure as you can be that you don't have a conflict of participating in this vote or any discussion.
I own nothing.
Okay, so I'm just saying that out loud. So that everybody can consider that. Obviously, it has been fully considered at every point prior to this. It's just I'm reminding councillors that any conflict of interest regarding any submission is precisely the same as any conflict of interest regarding any notice of motion. But that would have been in everybody's minds, obviously, up to now with every other decision that we've made. So, Councillor Tommy Riley, seconded by Councillor Sharon Tolan. So are we ready? So back to Councillor Tolan. Back to Councillor Tolan,
I don't know if the planners can bring up that map there in relation to that side of the road. And I haven't put down a motion, and I'm happy to accept the Chief Executive's recommendation. However, I just want to note that, well, no, I don't accept, but I am opposed to that side of the road being zoned town centre. And I think that, to reflect back on what happened over the last couple of years in relation to the old Creevely site getting planning permission by Aldi, there was a lot of upset at that time in relation to the site and it being so close to the seaside. It's done, it's built. The reason it was granted planning permission was because the area was zoned town centre. Now that little bit of blue box, to my mind, should not be town centre. It's a pub and there's a couple of residents in the yellow box there. It's a couple of small houses. My understanding is for an expansion of possibly a cafe or something like that. So, my own observation would be that it's more appropriate to be zoned tourism in order to facilitate any further development on that site, but to protect it from any large town centre development. We have a submission in there from Lidl in relation to the draft county development plan, actively looking for a site in Meath. My heart would be set crossways if Lidl set up on that site, put it that way. As I said, it's on the SAC, the Boyne or the Nanny Shore and River SAC and SPA. So I don't understand what the justification was to allowing that be zoned town centre. You're on mute, Caherlock.
We just proposed and seconded.
So we're on the,
David, this is change. We have to deal with the no change.
yeah, we're dealing with the no changes, yeah, councillor. Yeah, so this is no change recommended. This falls within no
That is
change.
a change recommended.
Yeah, but we're dealing with the submissions that have no change recommended at the moment.
I thought they were just adopted.
No, we have to go through the agreement process. So proposer, seconder.
Well, rather than, okay.
Yeah, so we have
Rather than repeat myself, you'll know it's coming.
just like, yeah, so we have it, so we proposer, seconder, then an agreement, and people not in agreement. So we Councillor Meath.
Well, if we're going to talk about that motion, I suppose the point.
No, we're not. Sorry. Hold on a second.
If
we're not talking about. We're talking about submissions at the moment. We're not talking about motions. Okay, that's just for clarity. We're just kind of getting a little bit. We need to draw it back to where we've been to ensure that we're consistent and we don't lose the topic around we're talking, so everybody can stay on together. So we are talking about the submissions that we are no change recommended. Proposed by Councillor. So these were, sorry, again, just for clarification, these were proposed by Councillor Behan. So he has no conflict within the discussion of the no change recommended. So could Councillor Behan please be invited back into the room? Just for clarification, Sean, submission 779 is not contained within the 29 no change recommended. 28, sorry.
No, there's a change recommended, Cathaoirleach, in submission 779. Yeah,
okay, so
thank you.
Grant. So just for clarification, so everybody is quite clear. It's understood, it's fine, there's no problem. It's just that we're all clear what's going on. So once Councillor Behan comes back into the room, then we have to go back to the original situation. Councillor Riley, you no longer propose these submissions. It's Councillor Behan and Councillor Tolan.
What, Cathaoirleach, am I out of a job or what happened?
That's it now. That's it. Hello. So we had inadvertently moved on to the next discussion. So you have no conflict with regards to the submissions with no change recommended as you had proposed. So you continue to be the proposer of that. It's the next when we move on to the next submission. So let's stay on the ones we're on at the moment first, though, before we get to the ones. Stay where we are before we go anywhere. So if we could go to the voting page. So if you're in agreement with the no change recommended of the 28 no change recommended submissions, please indicate your agreement now. Thank you, councillors. If you could lower your hands, please. Councillor Damien O'Reilly. Councillor Drew. Okay, so if you're not in agreement, Councillor Drew, have you fallen over? So if you are not in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation on those 28 submissions, please indicate that now. Okay, so it's 23 in the agreement, nobody in a disagreement. Thank you. So Sean, we'll move on to the next section.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. Just call up the presentation again, then in relation to, that's the wrong one, apologies. In relation to the 7 where change recommended, and this is the one which contains a recommendation for a change with regards to 779.
Okay, so can we have a proposer to discuss? Oh yeah, Councillor Behan. Councillor Behan. Is there Councillor Behan there? He's gone. Okay, Councillor Behan has excused himself from the room, just so people are aware of that. So Councillor Paddy Mead, are you proposing those? You have a seconder for that, please? We have a seconder for those. Stephen McKee. Councillor McKee. Thank you. So Councillor Tolan. 779.
Yeah. I don't know. Do I need to repeat myself?
No,
I just.
okay.
I I don't agree with recommending a change to town centre zoning on that particular site. But I suppose when this goes back out to on public display, it is an amendment, so I will have an opportunity to make a submission or a motion in relation to that. I just want, I suppose, the planners and the public to be mindful that town centre zoning would support something like Lidl on a site that's right adjacent to high amenity and a special area of protection. Thank you.
And I suppose it's important to remember as well, any German discount store, as they're known, it's important to refer to them as such, not to identify anyone who's not.
Oh no, I only identified them because they were the ones who made a submission.
Okay.
I mean, they made a submission to the county development plan that they're actively seeking a site. That's the only reason.
That's contained. Councillor Meath.
I'd just like to highlight that Mr. Gillen that made this submission is one of the greatest contributors to Laytown and for local jobs. So much so he even employs the local councillor, Tom Beaton, in his pub. His in-laws, the O'Reillys, run the local shop up the road where they not only serve the community, they make sandwiches and that. He employs a lot of people locally. It's in that very same shop that there was meetings opposed to German retail stores were organised and held. That is the kind of people we're dealing with here. Local people employing local people. And if he wants to open a local cafe, it will also employ local people. And maybe another councillor can get a job there as well. So let's be clear. The Gilners and the O'Reillys deliver a good service to Laytown. And I'm sure what he wants to do here is in the best interest of the area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you have, of course, everybody has an opportunity to agree or disagree with the submission. So, Councillor Meath, if you lower your hand, thank you. So if we go to the voting screen, thank you. So if you could lower your hands until you're asked, please to raise them, and if you could indicate if you're in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation of the change recommended, please indicate that now.
I'm in agreement to all of them except one. So how do I
we'll
say
flag
yeah?
that. We'll note that. We'll note that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. There.
Yeah. So Councillor Tolan wishes her a disagreement with 779 to be noted.
Just for
779. Yeah. Okay. Okay, and councillors, if you could lower your hands, please. Councillor McKee, Tobin, Harding and Meath, please, if you could lower your hands, thank you. And if you're not in agreement with the Chief Executive recommendation, please indicate that now. Thank you. Sean? So that was 26 in agreement. No one disagreed with particularly that 1779, one disagreement. Thank you. If we could hold on to Councillor Behan gets an opportunity to replace himself. Okay, Councillor Behan, are you back in the room? If you could make some sounds. Councillor Behan?
Yes, Cahirlock, thank you.
Thank you. So, Sean?
Thanks, Cahirlock. And the remaining submission then 2, where there is a part change recommended. Thank you.
So we have a proposer for the part change recommended. Councillor Tolan, a seconder for part change recommended.
Seconded.
Councillor Thomas Behan. So if we could have a voting screen up, please. So in one moment when you're asked if you could indicate if you're in agreement with the Chief Executive's recommendation for the part change, please indicate that now. Thank you. And if you could lower your hands, please, councillors. Councillor McCabe, thank you. And if you could indicate if you're not in agreement, please do that. Okay, thank you very much. So that's 26 in favour or in agreement and nobody in disagreement. And thus closeth the chapter on Laytown, Bettystown and associated hinterland. Well done to everybody. Now we move on to Ratole.